All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Kickstart a Public Art Program in Your Community. So I will introduce our presenters here in just a minute, but before we get started, there are, of course, just a few housekeeping items that we need to go over. So first, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, but if you do have a question at any point during the webinar, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A box there in your control panel, and we'll monitor those throughout the webinar, and we'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end to answer questions as well. Next, live captioning is available for today's webinar, and you can access those captions by clicking on the closed captioning icon and selecting Show Subtitle. If you have audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, try logging off and logging back in. And also, please keep in mind that because we are presenting from different locations, there may be some slight variation in internet stability and bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thank you in advance for bearing with us. I promise that we will keep on rolling. And finally, we are recording today's webinar, and that recording will be available on our webinars page at oac.ohio.gov/webinars and on our YouTube channel by early next week. All right, that's it for housekeeping. So time to dive right in. I'd like to welcome our presenters, Amanda Golden and Josh Lapp of Designing Local, a certified woman-owned business dedicated to helping communities connect people to place through culture. So welcome, Amanda. I know Josh will be popping in here in just a little bit. He got caught up in another meeting, but he will be here soon. So Amanda, I'm going to toss things over to you. Take it from here. Thanks so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for tuning in to talk about this exciting topic. I do want to give a little bit of background on who we are so that we're not just some crazy people off the street who are talking to you about public art. As Katie said, my name is Amanda Golden. I'm the managing principal at Designing Local, and we are located in Columbus, Ohio. And we do cultural planning and public art planning all over the United States. We do a number of other things as well within our firm: historic preservation. We're doing a lot of landscape architecture work, urban planning, and then also downtown revitalization. We've worked in many communities all around the state, and I'm hoping that some of our folks who we've worked with are on the webinar today. As I said earlier, we are working all over the country doing public art, and I did want to kind of share that we are working coast to coast, and this is super helpful in our practice, primarily because we are able to learn what's happening all across the country, how people are funding public art. That is the biggest and most important question that we are asked on a regular basis. And we spend the majority of our days talking to different communities and thinking about how they're funding their programs and how they're funding programming and events and other cultural efforts. And so we really get to do really great work and kind of bring all of that information into our practice, which is really fantastic. We also get to experience a lot of what's going on in the rest of the country, primarily when it comes to arts and culture. So a lot of those trends that are happening, we're able to see those in real life. And it is really fantastic to kind of bring that expertise and that experience to all of our clients. So I wanted to kind of start off our conversation today by talking about what public art is and what it is not. So there are so many conversations happening right now that really began in 2020 about what is public art and what is representation and why does it matter. And I wanted to make sure before we begin talking about your own public art program that we were all on the same page about what public art is. And I have to mention, this is a Janet Eckelman piece. This is in LA, and the city of Columbus is about to get one of her pieces very soon at the intersection of Gay and High. But public art for many, many, many years, hundreds of years, has been defined in people's minds as something that's monumental, something that is often men on horseback with maybe some guns, evoking some kind of pride of country or war, evoking some kind of honor that all of us have had in our minds for many, many years. And when we ask our clients the question, what is public art and what is your intention behind kind of developing a program, many of them answer with this in mind, with this as their image of what public art is in their mind. And that narrative is changing. Monuments are still absolutely part of the conversation, but how those monuments are depicted and who is depicted within those monuments is rapidly changing, as it should. This is in Richmond, Virginia. And unlike many of the other monuments that have been put up in decades past, this is a monument to a woman named Magdalena Walker, whose family owned one of the first banks in Richmond. And the community really came together and decided that this is who they wanted to memorialize in this very important central public space. You can tell that this is in the middle of a bunch of different buildings. And they wanted this square to be something that was really important and a place honoring her contribution to their community. Public art changes things from what is expected to be mundane into things that are interesting. I love to show parking garages that have public art on them because let's face it, parking is something that we're always talking about, and parking garages are always part of the solution. And when we began talking about how public art can be integrated into parking garages, that's where things can really get interesting. Of course, murals can be applied to the building itself, or you can actually create locations within the garage that public art can be placed within. This is in Anaheim, California. It is only a 2-story garage, so it's not a very big garage, but you frequently see folks out here having their photos taken with it. Public art also is something that changes mundane infrastructure pieces into things that are interesting. This is a piece by Vicky Scurry. This is in Aurora, Colorado, or excuse me, Aurora, Washington. And she worked on developing a scheme for a pedestrian bridge to have more people want to walk across it instead of walking across that 6-lane road. And so the city hired her to think through how she could get more people up across this bridge and over the street. They were having some issues with pedestrian safety. And so she developed a color scheme and placed these pieces of art all across this bridge. And they've been able to really lessen the amount of pedestrian safety issues that they're having. And they're also seeing some celebration of this piece within their community. Public art can also be unexpected. One of my favorite things about public art is that we are always drawn to it if it's done really well. And I don't know about you, but if I saw this in the middle of an intersection or a middle of a plaza or really anywhere, I would want to go up and touch these rabbits and understand how they feel. Are they going to be soft? Are they going to give back to me? Are they created with some poles inside of them? How are they standing? And also, are they lit at night? What do these things look like? And how can I begin to interact with them? I hope that you've all seen this. This is one of our favorite pieces in Columbus. This is one of 3 of Terry Allen's deer. And this deer is over the Scioto River. And this deer is overlooking the river and looking at the skyline. And I can't tell you how many Instagram images you'll see of this deer when you search hashtags of Columbus. At the Arts Festival, I'm not sure if any of you attended, but at the Columbus Arts Festival just this last weekend, over July 10th through 12th, there actually was a flower cape on the back of this deer. And so this piece of public art, when it's just by itself, invites you to take a photo with it. But this flower flash installation that was done by the CDDC in partnership with the City of Columbus and the Greater Columbus Arts Council really invited people to think differently about the deer. There were so many images of this beautiful flower cape. You can totally find those on Instagram today. But public art can also be functional. The City of Pittsburgh has a really wonderful functional art program that's run by their cultural trust. And a number of years ago, they actually put out a call to artists to think about how public art can be integrated into their bike racks. And so they have a number of these bike racks all over town. And if you go online, you kind of get into deep dives about how, when these were placed and implemented and kind of what the conversation was when they were implemented, you see that people weren't actually hooking their bikes to them. They thought they were pieces of sculpture rather than bike racks, which I think is a great problem to have. Public art also provides an opportunity to increase safety and make things more beautiful. This is in Birmingham, Alabama. It's called Light Rails by Bill Fitzgibbons. And the community was really focused on getting people to walk from their neighborhood to downtown. And before these lights were installed, there wasn't a sense of safety in this area. And so they asked this artist to consider what it would look like to place lighting in here that was creative and really provide an opportunity for people to want to walk under this bridge. And so they did. And also, if you search Birmingham Rainbow Bridge, you'll also see a number of images of people who go there and pose with their dogs, with their families. And it's become this really special, beloved place. And many communities are actually looking to do just this in their own communities. So why does public art matter in your community, and why is it something that you should begin thinking about and planning for and kickstarting? For us, when we talk about public art and really building great communities, we know that the unexpected is something that really matters and really has value. This is in Montpelier, Vermont, and this is on a pedestrian alley. And this artist worked to place wheat pasted pieces all along the buildings along this alley. And you can see that he used the light pole to help pedestrians and folks who are walking in the alley think about this place as a tree. And the vines kind of span across the buildings, and there are monkeys that are kind of swinging from them, which is really wonderful, really unexpected, inexpensive, and very special. Public art also creates really interesting spaces. You know, we find in a lot of communities that are revitalizing, we have a lot of the same architecture, not that this is a mundane piece of architecture at all, but we find that some of the architecture that is being built looks the same no matter where you are. And so public art really does present an opportunity for those pieces and those buildings and those places to feel different and feel special and make people really want to be a part of them and become attached to those places. And I think for most of you who are working probably in the arts in your communities, and also maybe with the municipalities that you're within, you have to talk about public art as an economic driver. When we're talking about public art as an economic driver, we have to use words that our economic development folks and our city folks can understand. Because after all, we are always going to be justifying the need for public art and the need for funding for public art in our communities. In many communities, public art has become synonymous with the brands. And I'm talking, this is in Denver, this is Lawrence Argent's piece called I See What You Mean at the Denver Convention Center. For those of you who haven't seen it, this deer is, I believe he's a little over 3 stories tall, and he's peering into the convention center. And you can buy these little tiny deer that you can lean up against your own windows. It's just a really fun, special thing. But we know that the Chicago bean has become synonymous with Chicago's brand. And we are finding that the Columbus deer is becoming synonymous with Columbus. And so you can see that the investment from the bean to the bear to the deer, those are very different scales, but the branding and kind of the outcome of that investment is that public art and pieces of creativity and arts and culture are becoming synonymous with these places. But we think that the most important thing that public art does is really provide an opportunity for community values to be expressed in the built environment. This is one of the funniest pieces I think that I've seen in the last couple of years. This is in Atlanta. And this being is swallowing a car. And if you know anything about Atlanta, you sit in your car a lot and you sit in traffic a lot. And so this is just so funny. Everyone collectively hates the traffic in Atlanta, and the traffic is always an excuse for why you're 20, 50, 2 hours late to anything. And I think this is just great. It's so funny. This thing coming up from the bottom of the road is swallowing this car whole. So how can public art begin to impact public space? When we think about what tools we have at our disposal as municipalities and as community partners, parks are the greatest. Josh might disagree with me since he just joined, but parks are one of the greatest, if not the greatest opportunity to place public art within. This is a piece that traveled all over the United States, and I believe is still traveling, and it actually came to Columbus. But you jump on these circles, and they change colors when weight is applied. And so you can see people of all ages who are jumping around and really enjoying their time together. This came to the Franklin Park Conservatory in 2019, and it was a fantastic experience because you're together at night and you're jumping around with people of all different ages and all different backgrounds, and everyone's laughing and having a great time. And the installation did that. I also have to show this piece because when we think about parks, we can't not think about playgrounds. And this is Domino Playground in New York City. And Mark Riegelman, who is actually an Ohio native from Cleveland, designed this piece with landscape structures for Domino Park. And Domino Park used to be the location of an old sugar factory for Domino Sugar. And when Mark, the artist, paired up with landscape structures to create this park, he began thinking about how kids could turn into sugar as they were playing. So you'll see the blue structure that kids kind of climb up it, and they're like, his vision is to go through a turbine, and then they're sliding down, and then they're going through the entire process of becoming sugar, and then they come out, and his thought is that, hey, now they're sugar. But an artist is thinking differently about how kids play, and is thinking about how to activate their brains and really begin to help them put themselves in different situations and think creatively through play. And what better way to get an artist involved in developing your community than through helping your parks department develop parks for people of all ages. Another really great opportunity for public art is at community facilities. This is a piece in front of a library in Palo Alto. There are a series of orbs, and the orbs are lit from within and have all different languages that are spoken in Palo Alto. There are specific phrases that are represented in all different languages. And at night, you can see that these beautiful pieces shine down on the sidewalk, and you kind of have to like walk around to see what they're saying. The same happens during the day, and it looks different as the sun moves. So you see a different pattern as that sun moves. It's very beautiful and provides a little something extra for a building that's usually closed at night. You think about a library, it closes at 6 or 7. And this is at, past dark that you're photographing this. So this does provide some kind of sense of place in the evening when the library is usually closed. Public art also has some major value on our corridors. I know in all of our communities, we all have overpasses and underpasses for highways. And they really do provide an excellent opportunity to place public art on them, around them, and within them. I know in Columbus, we're specifically working with ODOT on a project to do some creative lighting, as well as a mural on the I-70 bridge on the west side of the city. But in Philadelphia, they're also working with their DOT to place some really fabulous neon lights. There's a bunch of neon signs in a district that's nearby. So they're really kind of leaning on what's in the built environment near them and bringing that into this corridor that really creates a gateway into this neighborhood, which is really special and really important in talking about what's special about that neighborhood. This piece is in Columbus too. The same artist who did the bear in Denver, Lawrence Argent, also did this piece, and this is called Flaming Kiss. This is in Columbus and also kind of flanks a corridor going down to the riverfront. There's a passive park on either side, but as you're driving through these two pieces, and it's really awesome, really special, and something that's really interesting. I've shown a lot of sculpture on corridors, but it's also really important to think about how murals also play a major role on corridors and how beautiful they can be. And murals also provide a really wonderful way to invest less money and invest more often over time. Public art also plays and should play a major role in new development. We know that when private developers are coming into our communities, oftentimes they're just looking to make sure that they can just meet the standards. And many cities are able and do have the power to say, hey, let's think about how public art could be integrated into your new development, your new apartment complex, your new office building, maybe your new hotel. And those developers, if they're responsive, sometimes, most often, are receptive to this request. You can imagine that without this public art, this would just be a plain, the material is like a tan stucco where this mural was placed, but this would just be a plain building. And so instead, the developer was able, along with community partners, the Short North Alliance, was able to execute this mural and then another mural on the other side of this building. And they are very beautiful. They're even more beautiful in person than they are in this image. And again, I got to bring back the parking garage. This is a piece by Benjamin Ball. And, you know, when you think about a parking garage in a community, you think about, okay, how am I going to remember where I parked, especially if I'm traveling, if I'm visiting from out of town, other than putting a Google pin where my car is. If I'm doing a lot of walking, how am I going to know where I parked? A lot of communities have found great success in placing public art on those garages to help with wayfinding and to help with memory of where people are parking. And also just to create a beautiful presence on the streets. But public art also creates really special and fabulous gathering spaces. This is a Claude Cormier fountain. This one is in Toronto, but there's actually also a piece of his in Mount Vernon that's relatively new. But this is belovedly called the dog fountain. I don't know its real name. But all these dogs are, you know, kind of blowing water into this fountain, and there's one cat, and the cat is not blowing water. It's just sitting on the edge. But super fun, very beautiful. As you can see, very well loved. People are riding the animals, posing with the animals. And if you were to go kind of, you know, dog fountain on Instagram or anywhere else, I'm sure that you would see it. Public art also creates an opportunity for lighting in places that, as you can see, this would be a very just kind of boring space between two different buildings. And this artist really focused on lights and how that light brings a lot to this empty space. And then finally, public art is value revealing. This is a piece by Dreyfus, and he focused, this is in Charlotte, and he focused on Charlotte's role in the civil rights movement. And each of these pieces are vinyl pieces that are framed and then hung from the top and then, you know, kind of supported on either side. But it really celebrates the city's place in the civil rights movement. He also did this piece in Cleveland, also very beautiful. This is I believe it's called Protest Square by Dreyfus, but he wanted to talk about how important this place was for many, many years in the city of Cleveland. And he depicted protesters and people who are kind of raising their voice and advocating for different things. And then also this piece is part of the Canal Convergence in Scottsdale, Josh. And
Yes.
it's this really beautiful thing that they do every single year. It's a public art festival, and the city cares so much about public art that they do a call annually, and this happens over a long weekend. And it's just a really wonderful thing. They're celebrating the water and the movement of the water. So today we're hoping and believe that I think that there's a lot of interest in public art in Ohio. And we know that our major cities, while they don't all have strong public art programs, they all have public art coming out of what the cities are doing. And so we wanted to make sure that we began to talk about how small cities are accomplishing the same things that larger cities are accomplishing, and then talk about how they did that. And so we went back and forth with each other on, should we select small cities in Ohio, or should we talk about cities outside of Ohio who have done some of this work? And we decided that we would prefer to talk about cities that we've worked with, because we know those so intimately, and we'll be able to answer your questions very directly about how they funded some of these projects. So we have two communities for you today. I'm going to talk about Montpelier, Vermont, which is a town of almost 7,500 people. And it is the state of Vermont's capital, but their public art program was established in 2018. And they were able to really establish their program through the NEA Our Town grant program. But for many, many, many years, they have had many installations in their community and many successes. They have a culture of loving their community, of music, of people spending time together. There are a ton of creatives and artists that live in that community who are always creating opportunities for programming and gathering. And so for them, this public art program felt like a natural next step for them. I have to just say one thing. I wasn't going to say it. This photo with all the hearts, they have a Valentine bandit who comes out the night before Valentine's Day every single year and puts giant hearts and hearts like this all over every single building in downtown. What a special, fun thing to have in a community. So before the city decided that they needed an official program, they had a lot of things happening there in their downtown. They had a very, very active DDA. And on the DDA, they had a subcommittee that was an art subcommittee. And the art subcommittee very much only focused on public art. They had an events subcommittee that focused on events, music, other theatrical programming. But this art committee really focused on public art and how to get public art into that community in a way that was within their budget. And so those folks really began to think about how different artists could be involved and how they could be involved with limited funding, which is all of our, I think, all of what we're trying to do. Every single one of us are thinking about how we can do so much with so little. And so the city of Montpelier said, all right, we'll help support some of the materials, but we want you guys to help execute the projects. So on one of the alleys, they said, we want a permanent mural to be able to be on this building at all times. We want it to be large, we want it to be noticeable, but we want it to be able to be changed. And so you can see the image on the top left is kind of a screen, and they print different murals that are placed up there on an annual basis. This photo in particular highlights a photographer who was taking photos of folks who were doing some track events. But this changes every single year. If you were to go online and look at what they're doing now, right now there's a Black Lives Matter mural up there that is also very beautiful that was done by one of their high school students. So it changes, and it becomes something that people look forward to seeing what's going to come the following season. They also did a Before I Die wall, which I'm sure many of you have seen, but if you haven't, it's this really great, very inexpensive, interactive opportunity for people to contribute to the conversation of what they want to do, what are their biggest hopes and dreams. And so they painted plywood with chalk paint, and they did Before I Die, and then you kind of fill it in. And there are these little like baskets of chalk, and people are there kind of working on that. Montpelier is also very cold and sees a lot of snow. And the committee felt strongly that the art needed to be something that people could see in the winter that would bring joy and, kind of bring a smile to people's faces as they're walking from, restaurant to restaurant or moving around on their, everyday activities. So on this image, you can also see that they've placed some fun colored pieces of wood in different patterns to create something visually pleasing between two buildings in the back of an alley. The city also cares a lot about public space, and that DDA is somebody who, when we were working there and even now and back then, was constantly pushing the city on creating more public space that was accessible and inviting for everyone. So one artist who was in town named Ward Joyce developed this community parklet on Langdon Street, and he programmed it with the DDA. They had concerts, they had chess like competitions, and they had all of these really like interesting things that happened on this parklet, and it became a central meeting space, which was his entire intention. They also developed some of these really interesting seating areas that are kind of around. Ward, again, was the one who developed that, also an artist. And then this image also, the city of Montpelier kind of has these two rivers that flow through it, and they flow through their downtown. And as you can see, these buildings are 2 and 3 stories. And the river was very important to that community, but they wanted the river to feel more inviting to walk across without these kind of, little planter boxes. It would just be a black bridge, which is cool and fun. But how much better is it now that there's these cute little blue planters and some other plants there that the DDA helped facilitate? The city of Montpelier also loves to participate in community visioning. They have a very involved community. And Gallery Savor, who is no longer living in Vermont, but living in North Carolina, she facilitated a conversation where the community actually envisioned what they want for their public art program and what they want their public art to be in the future. She did a 2-week-long residency in the school where people, wrote their vision on these small pinwheels, and then she invited the families of those kids to come and hang those and put those out in front of City Hall. And that stood up for about 3 weeks so people could come through and see those visions from other families and other kids in the community. Montpelier also, as I shared a little bit earlier, cares a lot about the river activation and also cares about being a good steward of the river and didn't want to put any art within the river. So they worked to place art across the river that wouldn't damage or impact the ecosystems that were in the river. And you can kind of see that these pieces kind of hang down. They're very beautiful. And also these really wonderful blue pieces of plastic just kind of move in the wind, and they're just really fun to see as you walk across. And you can see the snow under them and think, oh, we are going to have life again after the winter goes away. And then I also wanted to show this. When I was preparing this week, I noticed that this is something that they're working on now too, which is this vacant parking lot activation. And so many of us in Ohio have these vacant parking lots in our communities. And so how awesome is it that this community is thinking about how to place paint in these vacant parking lots? And when they're vacant, you can create programming within those. And I wanted to show too the largest piece that they've done to date. So all of those pieces that we've shown up until now were done, in partnership with the DDA, and we're done on, a smaller budget. As part of the NEA Our Town grant, the city contributed $50,000 to a piece of public art being placed in a new transit shelter, or excuse me, a transit station that would be the terminus of a bunch of Greyhound buses that were coming up from New Hampshire, and also were coming down from Burlington. And this was going to be kind of a new hub for people to transition to new routes on transportation routes. And so they selected 2 artists, and this bench spins very slowly. And then there's this wonderful sign that has all these different poems written by the community. And as it spins, each of these pieces of the sign flip down, and you get to see all these different poems that were written by the community. It's very beautiful. And the largest investment that Montpelier has made to date. And I'm going to go ahead and let Josh introduce himself, as well as begin to talk about Glenwood Springs, Colorado.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today. And just a reminder, you can submit some Q&A questions to us, and we'll be answering those either, as we're going along here, or we can also answer those at the end. So feel free to submit those in the chat, or also through the Q&A session, and we'll try to get to those all, because our goal here is to help you today. I'm excited to talk about Glenwood Springs. I think it's a really great case study in a community and how it invests in art, even though it might be a smaller community. We were very fortunate to work there, and while it may have mountains, and that sets a little bit apart from Ohio here, it is a relatively small community of about 10,000 people, and was really getting into the game in public art. The community is about 3 hours from Denver on I-70. And it's kind of was a transportation hub historically, had a lot of beautiful historic downtown. Also had a really hot spring, hence the Glenwood Springs. So that was fun to go and visit. But they also, they were really thinking, how do we invest in public art? They have been doing some investments over the years in fits and starts. The pieces you're seeing here, one of those was purchased by a nonprofit arts group in the community and placed on a public property with approval of the city. The kayaker there you're looking at, that was actually on private property. A bank built a new headquarters and just decided, they wanted to display some public art. So that was great, getting into this, through a variety of realms. And then the last one there, the marble piece on the bottom left, that was actually done through an NEA Our Town grant. And the community was able to get this piece of work implemented by a sculptor from Colorado. And that was as part of a bridge project that was being done by their Department of Transportation in conjunction with the city. So, again, they were doing things in fits and starts, but they were looking at different ways of, actually implementing this. So our planning process actually took place during the pandemic. And one of the things that they were really concerned about, they were a tourist focused community. They were a community that they were actually not only impacted by the pandemic, but also by a large scale wildfire that burnt through some of their most kind of impressive hiking areas. So they're really thinking, how do we get some interest into our community? How do we ensure that folks are still coming downtown to our businesses? So the DDA, as Amanda mentioned, the DDA in Montpelier, well, the DDA here, the Downtown Development Association Authority, actually worked with the city to implement these wings. So you might have seen the wings in Nashville. I see some people with arms now at some fitness places. We have seen some of those. Well, they worked with some local artists to do these butterfly wings that were kind of temporarily mounted throughout the community. So they had 10 different sites where they put these up. They're, well, some are butterflies, some are different, you see the moths, you see the dragonflies, you see all kinds of different ways that they were looking at this. And this was really a low cost, low scale. I think the entire project maybe cost less than $10,000 to actually get these implemented and out and into the environment to draw some interest. So you can see that, you can do those kind of large scale pieces that they do over time, or you can do some of these more small scale pieces in the short term and really getting things out in the environment. The last thing I want to note about how Glenwood Springs is funding their public art, that was an outcome of the planning process, was actually they wanted to implement a percent for art in private development. And the way that they decided to do that was actually set a fee based on the square footage of new buildings that were being built. And that fee is dictated by their city council. That was one way for them to, it's not going to generate a lot of funding because they're a relatively small community, but they do have some development happening. So, they may generate $10,000 or $20,000 a year through that fee, but that is going to help them implement the scale of projects that they're interested in doing alongside other things like their NEA funding.
And so now that we've shown you guys all the things that, public art can be and is in different communities and how these small cities are running their public art programs, we wanted to talk a little bit about funding. So how are small cities funding public art? And Josh mentioned some of these similar policies, but there are some tried and true methods in communities that have been used for the last, 40, 50 years. And that primarily sits in thinking about a percent for art program. And that percent for art program essentially asks a city to designate a certain percentage, usually between 1% and 2%, to public art within any projects that they're doing, like a park, like a community facility, which includes like fire stations or police stations. It includes community centers. Also, we are advocating that it also include different streetscape projects. So if you're doing anything that is about providing new pedestrian amenities and really kind of making our streets smaller and slower and safer, think about how public art can become part of that experience for the pedestrians. So we're finding that small cities are adopting those policies that are similar to large cities. Many of them are saying, hey, like our CIP budget is not the same as a place like Columbus, or, and I want to be clear, the city of Columbus does not have that policy, so that's not what I'm saying, but we're not a city that is as large as Columbus, so our CIP budget is not that large. But when you think about those different things that you're building in your community, parks are natural places for public art to be in and be within. And so including that as part of the budget from the very beginning is really helpful in planning those new public spaces. We're also finding that these small cities are really kind of blessed with really wonderful advocates. And those advocates have been advocating for funding for public art for years and years and years. And so we find that utilizing those relationships with elected officials and saying, hey, like, why don't we have funding for public art? And if we don't, let's talk about how to fund public art within these very specific projects. And so that advocating really leads to really great projects. As Josh and I both shared in those two case studies, both Montpelier and in Glenwood Springs, there is a ton of community collaboration. We often find that these small cities cannot manage public art programs just because they don't have the staff, and that is okay. And that's where that collaboration really becomes meaningful and really becomes impactful. So the DDA, your Main Street organization, any of your arts organizations that are within your communities are really going to be really awesome partners. And they also open you up to being able to apply for more grants than the city could apply for. The other thing too that we find makes small communities have successful programs is identifying who those champions are. If it's during the planning process, then we need those champions at the beginning of the planning process and throughout the planning process, but especially when the plan is done. But it's in those communities that have the champions that have successful programs already and are just building upon that success. And then finally, I did want to mention too that your hotel motel tax in your communities are something that is a really great resource to fund public art. There are some specific limitations around what you can do with the hotel motel tax, but it's all about re-attracting those tourists, and public art is absolutely part of that equation. And so I would encourage all of you to explore, hey, how are we spending our hotel motel tax? Is it at its highest threshold? Is there an appetite in our community to increase that? And then whatever the increase is, to capture that for public art or just arts and culture generally. Because again, that's about bringing folks back to the community and really providing some opportunity for those folks to become attached to your community and come back again and again and again. Josh, is there anything else that you want to add to this?
No, I think that the one thing that really stood out to me that we were just discussing is the identification of those champions, because
Yes.
ultimately that is, we need folks in every community to step up, especially in small communities. It doesn't always have to be, it can be done in consultation and collaboration with the village or the city, city council. But I think having those private champions is always helpful. And it also is helpful, to help get our elected officials to act. And as planners, when we're coming into a community, obviously the city is generally supporting the work that we're doing because they're hiring us to come do it. But it always is really beneficial for us as planners when there's a group of folks that are really active and want to see public art happen. So your advocacy as a private individual is really important to us.
Absolutely. So I kind of said this, where do we even start? I think it's really important to think about how, if you don't have a program in your community and you're like, oh, if we could just get one piece of public art, that would change everything. So I kind of wanted to think through and help you kind of take in small bites what the steps might be in order to get there. And it's really important to think, and I know that saying this is a lot easier than actually doing it, but it's really important to think through all the potential issues before they arise, because when you're doing public art, they are there. The issues, even if you plan for more issues, always come up. And I think planning for those and understanding what things might come up will help you have a successful project. The other thing too that I'll mention in our work is that we want to make sure that every client and every elected official and every city staff member has a perfect experience with public art, because we find that in many communities, people aren't doing public art because they think it's too hard. And it's hard, but it's not too hard. It's just a muscle that people aren't used to using. And when they're having conversations with artists or dealing with artists, those planners and the people in city government are more used to dealing with people who speak their language. So engineers, planners, landscape architects, and artists aren't necessarily speaking that language. And so if we can help you set your program or your projects up for success, that's what we want to do, because we want everyone to have a really fabulous experience so that you'll do it again and again and again. And so the first step, and I know it's like, think strategically. Well, you would think strategically throughout the entire process, but thinking about what your budget is, what is your budget from the very beginning? That helps you put a very clear call out to the artists that you're interested in having applied to do your project. You want to understand what your site is. And when we're thinking about infant public art programs and public art site selections, it's going to be really important that you think about how to maximize the impact. So where's it going to go? We want to make sure that we're placing public art in places that people are going to see it, if that's the intention. If the intention is for it to be something that people are surprised and they see, like on a trail or something like that, we still want to maximize the impact. And we want to make decisions that lead to very specific reactions. And then a timeline is also really important, and sticking to that timeline is important for all people involved. For the city, because you're going to have to go through permitting. It's really important for the artists because those artists are fitting you and your project into their schedule. And throwing off the schedule even by a few weeks is not cool for those artists because they have their work, specifically in public art, lined up. And many of their work is dependent upon weather. The second step is to really think about how you're going to select an artist. There are a number of different methods that you can use to select an artist. Josh and my most favorite method is to do an RFQ. We want to make sure that when we're doing calls for artists, that we are creating the easiest way for artists to apply. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things for artists to apply to. And we want to make applying to our project the easiest possible. We don't want to make them have to do any work other than just kind of gather the materials for the submission. So no matter what type of project you're doing, if you're doing an RFQ, we always say, hey, we want to see 5 to 10 images of your past work. We want 3 references, and we're interested in kind of a resume or CV, and then also a letter of interest. That allows you to see the artist in a snapshot, and you're not sorting through too much information that becomes really difficult for your selection committee to work through. Once your selection committee has selected maybe those 3 or 5 artists that you want to see a proposal from, then you would invite those artists to develop those concepts, and they would be paid for the development of those concepts. We recommend that about 1% of the total project budget is spent on that per diem, or not a per diem, but just a payment for the concept. But if it's a very small project, we want to make sure that artists are still being compensated for their time. So at minimum, we think 200 is an appropriate kind of budget for a small project that might yield $15,000 or so. The next thing too is to really think about who's going to be on that selection committee. The selection committee is really important because you want to have folks on there who, one, have some experience in public art or some design background. So they can look at some of these submissions and say like, hey, this artist has a really great background. They really know what they're doing. Let's see a proposal from them and see what they might submit. Or they might be able to say, hey, you know, this artist doesn't really have a lot of experience in murals of this scale. So let's see if this mural might, or this artist might be interested in teaming up with a more experienced muralist. Those kinds of things. We also find that the selection committee is the best place for your community to get involved, especially if you don't have a public art commission or an arts commission generally. The selection committee provides an opportunity for people from the neighborhood or from downtown, if they're placing the public art within downtown, to get involved with making selections. And then finally, you're selecting the art. That's the fun part. I get the privilege of never sitting on these selection panels. I just get to facilitate them. So I never had the hard job. I just get to organize all the people and all the stuff. But in all of the projects that we've kind of run the processes for, it's very difficult because there are really great concepts and there's some awesome artists out there. The next step is to go through artist fabrication and installation. And this part, I think a lot of folks are like, oh, step 1 and 2 are the easiest parts. I think step 3 is probably the most difficult because it requires the most attention to detail. We think it's important to select one point of contact within the managing organization. It's very difficult, as with any project, to have multiple people giving different direction when you should have one point of contact and one person who has all the information about the project in their brain. It's going to be important that the artist, as well as the staff or the person managing the process, understands that there is going to be some design refinement, whether that's in response to material availability or price volatility, or whether it's in response to some of the issues that may have come up during permitting about the weight of a sculpture or the condition of a building, or maybe another approving body has some issue. And so there has to be some design refinement to meet the qualifications for the project. Then you've got your fabrication, and then your installation. And the fourth step that I think people forget a lot and they're like, oh goodness, the project is done, it's installed, we're done. Well, no, everybody needs to be celebrated who participated in bringing that piece of public art to your community. So plan a celebration event. Those artists who are creating the artwork deserve to be celebrated and deserve to be honored for the work that they put in to bring art to your community. Make sure that you're thanking those artists and any community partners that participated in the development of that piece. And then I always like to say, to come back together at the end of the process and include the artist and say, hey, what worked during this process and what didn't? And that way you can learn from that. And the collective organization or the city or the group of volunteers are able to say, hey, this worked during this project and this really didn't. Let's really think about how we can do it differently the next time. So I've got some kind of best practices just for murals and also for sculpture that are just kind of like snapshots. But when you're thinking about murals in your community, it's really important to think about budget. You want to compensate these artists fairly for what they're doing, because what they're doing is really hard work. It is physical work. And the budget right now, and it has been for a couple of years, is 25 to 30 a square foot. And so when you're thinking about hiring an artist, you need to really make sure that your budget is appropriate to attract an artist, because artists need to be paid for all the time that they're spending, both in gathering the materials, designing the piece, but also executing the piece. The site selection is really, really important. So many of you live in historic communities with historic buildings, and thinking about how you wouldn't make the historic folks upset by selecting non-primary facades or building facades that are not historic, or buildings within your downtowns that aren't historic. Doing that really just prevents you from a lot of heartburn later on in the process, where you're having to deal with those commissions and them asking questions. The surface preparation is really important. For brick, if the brick is in good condition and the mortar's in good condition, then it's fine. And artists actually like to paint on brick because the paint adheres to it well. But we've worked with a couple artists on different projects where there is deteriorating concrete, or there's conduit kind of above the concrete, and there's drippage from the metal and the water that's seeping on that, and it creates stains on the concrete. And so there's some concern about, okay, what will the integrity of the artwork be in 2 years, 3 years after all of the dripping? So there are some things that you should think about as you're selecting what building or retaining wall that you're going to place something on. Anti-graffiti coating is always just a really great item to invest in. We're advocating with the majority of our clients that anti-graffiti coating is paid for out of a different budget. And the onerous of paying for that coating is not on the artist itself. The artist will apply the anti-graffiti coating, but not necessarily pay for that. That's because it comes in large buckets, and the murals usually don't take the entire application, and you as an organization can save that as an investment for future murals that you might have and be able to use it on later projects. Also think about lighting. Should these murals be lit? We hope that almost all murals can be seen at night, but we also understand different sites have different constraints. And so think about that. That's something that should always be part of the conversation. And then also lifespan. This paint will, in Ohio, 10 to 15 years if it's good paint with the anti-graffiti coating. It's kind of the lifespan. But we're finding that many communities are interested in changing out those murals every few years to generate more interest and more beautiful spaces, and to give artists more opportunity to create stuff in their communities. And some of those things.
Just quickly before we go into sculptures, Amanda, I think one of the questions was, how do we address if a mural is fading or deteriorating? And I think the last point Amanda was making about the longevity and the rotation of those murals is important to remember. Murals are not forever. Our preference is that you likely would have a new mural painted on that wall once the mural becomes deteriorated or is fading. You could always pay the same artist to redo or to touch up the existing mural. But I think from a planning perspective, our preference is typically to have a new mural installed just to kind of re-energize that space and to add additional interest. But again, we're talking about a 5, maybe a 10-year span, depending on how good the mural is looking. And it's always important to remind, everyone, but particularly community members, that murals are they're semi-permanent. They are not intended to be permanent installations.
Right. Absolutely. And some of the same things are true for sculpture. That lifespan is really important, as Josh said. We're finding more and more that communities aren't interested in these sculptures that are intended to last 30 years, which has been the practice in the past. But many communities are more interested in temporary sculpture. So I think up to 5 years. Some communities participate in kind of a sculpture rotation where the different sculptures kind of come to different communities, which is an interesting way to approach that. And then some communities are also thinking about how sculpture can be integrated into, different streetscapes. This project is here in Columbus and is a project that we did with Mark Riegelman. And this was part of a streetscape budget, the High Street Streetscape budget, which was a $25 million project. And there was a $500,000 allocation to public art. But you really need to think about what the impact is that you want from the sculpture and make sure that your budget matches that expectation. We find a lot in communities, people are like, I want an iconic piece of art, but I only have $20,000 and we want a sculpture. And I'm like, well, maybe we should focus then on creating a mural in your downtown that's very large, that makes the same impact, but is better fitting within that budget. Because you always want to think about, what can I pay for that will maximize that impact? And often we find that in sculpture, you need to have a significant budget in order to accomplish something that's really great and maintains that interest over the years. Site selection is also really important. Where are people going to interact with this? How are they going to interact with this? The materiality is so important when thinking about, right now, prices and how the price of the sculpture will change, but also in terms of what the maintenance requirement will be for that piece in the future. And then finally, the staff is a huge need. If you are the commissioning body of a sculpture, you need to really think through the staff person that you are making this to be their responsibility, how much time they have. Are they going to be able to go out to the site pretty often to make sure, this is being done, especially if the artist isn't in town? So just thinking through some of these things are really important. Anything else you want to add here, Josh?
No, I don't think so, but we have some questions. So
excellent.
I'm excited to go through those. So the first question, and I might be able to answer this one, is from Wilma, and she asks, I've always wondered who owns the public art once the project is complete, or who is responsible for maintaining and sustaining the murals, sculptures, etc. Is that something that's agreed upon between parties? Is the building owner's responsibility, or the local city governments, or the nonprofits? I think the best way to answer this is, typically, we are typically working for municipal governments, so for cities or villages. If they're commissioning a piece of artwork, it's their responsibility to maintain that artwork. I think the same is true for whoever is commissioning that, whether it's a private property owner or whether it's a nonprofit. I think if you're commissioning the artwork, you should be responsible for maintaining that into the future. I think that is just as members of the community that want to see more art, we should always be thinking about the longevity and the long-term maintenance of the artwork. And so that's what I would say to that one. Any additional thoughts on that, Amanda?
No, I don't think so. I will also say, we're working, this is just a really interesting kind of thing, is that we're working in Columbus, and the public service department is the manager of the public art project that we're working on. And so within the permit that they are issuing to us, even though they're the owners, each piece has a lifespan, and public service within the issuance of that permit is responsible for removing that art at whatever set time they created. And so we find, and murals are a little different, and by a little, I mean a lot, but if you're not doing a mural, you need to have the artist who's developing the piece of art for you develop a maintenance plan and say, hey, what should I be anticipating that we're going to need to be doing in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? What should I be doing, quarterly throughout the year? Is it okay just to get a spray off? And have the artist kind of dictate that to you so that you can put that into your workload as an organization.
That's very helpful. I'm going to go back to a question that we got in the chat earlier, which is, have any of these communities had to deal with vandalism, and what is done to minimize such activity? I have a few examples. So I think when it comes to murals, typically murals are really a deterrent to vandalism or graffiti. So many of our cities that we've worked with have actually used murals as a way to deter that from happening. Typically folks that are tagging or doing graffiti, tend to see themselves as artists as well, and tend to respect the artwork. But you can always use those anti-graffiti coatings and other things when it comes to murals, but that's also true of sculptures. And the sculptures are always going to need maintenance long term. So I know that there have been some issues with the deer that we showed earlier in the presentation. And that those kind of things need a regular watch over. But it's relatively inexpensive to hire somebody that's specialized in maintaining that over the long term. So if there is a little bit of vandalism. One of our communities that we've worked with outside of Ohio, they had some pretty significant vandalism of one of their pieces of artwork. And in our discussion about that with the team there in this community, one of the things we identified is just the placement of the piece was kind of off a busy road, away from where people were interacting with it regularly. And so it kind of opened itself up to that kind of vandalism because it wasn't in a very visible spot and it wasn't something that had eyes on it a lot of the time. So some of the same things that we would apply to other facets of life, we want things to be visible. We want things to be, I think the placement really matters with that. So I would really be thinking about that when you're placing your piece from the perspective of wanting it to be seen and wanting it to be impactful, but also to ensure that, there are eyes on it as much as possible so that it is going to be preventing that kind of vandalism. Anything to add, Amanda?
No, not at all.
No. Okay, great. Yay. Good for me. Okay, so moving on. So one of the questions from Jessica, this was about the hotel motel tax, and can we speak more about how we would leverage those funds to be allowed to be used for public art? So I think some communities actually direct those funds to public art. Certainly the city of Columbus has they've instituted their ticket tax and things that go towards public art, but they also devote some of the hotel motel tax to the Greater Columbus Arts Council. They don't fund public art per se, but they do fund artists, and they have funded some programs in the past. Amanda, I don't know if you have any other thoughts to add about that.
Oftentimes too, that hotel motel tax can be used, as I said, for marketing. And so many people take a very liberal approach to what that means. And marketing is no longer just developing a logo and, posting on Instagram and, Twitter and whatever else, but it's events and creating awesome events. So many communities' entire event departments are funded by the hotel motel tax. So it's important to really understand how your elected officials view that. And that's at the county-wide level.
So I think this next one is a good one for you, Amanda. Is there an input from residents or business owners on what artwork gets installed in various areas?
Yes. So there are a number of ways to approach that. Yes, you should always have the community be represented in making those decisions. I think it's important for you to decide at the beginning in that step one, where you are thinking strategically about how much you want that community voice to be weighed, because at the end of the day, our firm and we always believe that the artist should be the person who is in charge of their design. And when you begin allowing so much community input, oftentimes we find that community members want the design to change in response to their comments. And that is not advocating for the artist. And at the end of the day, you would just be creating art by committee, which is it art or not? And so, we always try to provide really broad questions for the community to respond to, so that there is an opportunity for those ideas and those values to come through. And then the artist has access to all that information. And so if somebody said, I really hate X, Y, and Z in the community, and that populated multiple times, the artist would know, like, oh, I should stay away from this specific symbol or this specific, fact about the community when I'm generating my proposal. We also find that making sure representation on that selection panel includes people from the nearby businesses or the neighborhood, and making sure that those people are well respected within those circles is a really great way to provide meaningful community input. Some communities, I will say, do allow for community vote on different projects. And that's a way also to allow some participation in the conversation. But again, that's the artist already having come up with their proposals, and then those proposals are what's being put out there, and they're not providing comment on the content of the art. They are just providing a vote for which one they like the most. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think one thing I'll say about that is, again, I don't know that any of us really like to be judged. And so I think when it comes to a very, very public process, like voting on which art you like, I think that, I don't know that a lot of artists want to participate in that because they don't necessarily, want to have their work kind of critiqued in such a public way. I would also just add that, I think there's always going to be a certain level of art being in the eye of the beholder. So when we take a step back and really think about doing public art, we have to remember that there are always going to be people that do not like, you can have a piece and there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like it, and that's okay. And it's still spurring discussion. But when in the public art realm, we look at it this way: if we have a really strong process, a process that we believe in, and we know that it will yield in the selection of an artist, that is good and is deserving of this commission, then even if we don't like the outcome, like if I personally don't like the piece of art, I still can know that it was selected using a process that is really high quality, and that is basically the best that we can do, because we try not to control the content. So
and Josh, I'll just add one more thing too, is that if there is concern about that in your community, one of the things that you could do is all temporary work to begin. And that way people don't get so nervous about it if they know that it has an end. So, maybe you say, like, this is going to be up for a year. So the person or group of people that might hate the thing know that it's going to leave, and that's fine. And that makes everybody a little bit more comfortable with it, especially when it's a new kind of muscle that people are using.
Okay, so next question. Do you have thoughts on public art events such as mural weeks?
Yes, we do. We love them.
I think I was going to make a statement that the image that you're looking at is from essentially that type of event that we curated for the city of Columbus. So I'll let you, maybe you talk about our overall view on public art events and kind of those kind of things, Amanda.
Sure. So I think it's a great question. And I think it's one that should be explored by more communities, because if you think about the investment that it would take to do, let's say you want to do 5 murals over a weekend and you want them to all be downtown. In fact, I just wrote a very long program for this for the city of Conway, Arkansas. But let's say you want to do 5 murals and let's say you got $100,000. So these are like big murals, like 2-3 story murals, really awesome, and on major corners. So our recommendation for them is, hey, yeah, there are really great communities all over the country that do mural festivals. So let's build on their success and do something that's really specific to Conway. So install these 5 murals, like select the artist, have the community participate in that selection, and then have a long weekend. They're doing hopefully Labor Day weekend. But they're going to do a bunch of different programming too. So a ton of food trucks, live music on all these different stages that they're going to be setting up. And then also some alleyway, like interaction pieces that they're going to be placing there, like lights, and they're doing like a beer garden and all kinds of really fun stuff, and really building it up as an event. Our recommendation is that become an annual event, that they say, like, hey, we're going to identify every single private building within this parameter that meets the qualifications for placing a mural on it. If we have 12 of these buildings that we think would be great candidates, and we have $100,000 every year, I mean, maybe we could accomplish it depending on what the size of the buildings are, but do it until you've built all those out, and then move to another section of town and do it there. Maybe it's in an old shopping center or something. All of us are thinking about how we deal with those old shopping centers, but you can create some really awesome programming. The city of Fort Wayne, another project that we worked on, did a mural festival at the end of last year, in the fall of last year. And they did 4 murals in 4 different locations throughout the city, and had food trucks and music at each location. So it wasn't one location with multiple things happening. It was 4 different locations with things happening. So all that to say, we think very highly of that and think you should totally do that if that's something that you're interested in.
Before I move to the next question, we do have a few more minutes. So if any of you have any burning questions, please either put them in the Q&A or send them via chat, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. So we're happy to answer as many questions as you have. Next from Wilma, how do you engage with developers that view public art as one and done instead of seeing public art as a continuum or relationship with the community? This is a great question, because I do think that I think that even in communities where we have ordinances in place, we're working to help implement a plan in Port St. Lucie, Florida, that's funded through a percent for art ordinance. And that's kind of how it works with the developers, is they either implement their piece of artwork through the ordinance, or they pay an in lieu of fee, and once they do that, they've met the requirement and they're done. How do we change them from seeing that? I think a lot of what we've been talking about these temporary things, a lot of developers, their goal, of course, is to make money, and they make money through either selling homes or renting out their commercial space. And what they really need is attention on their property that will, increase their revenue. And so I think that we need to help those developers understand that doing, public art as an ongoing process and to keep people engaged with their development is going to be is something that would be great for them to do. So whether that's switching out a mural or whether that's doing some kind of, temporary installation, I think that would be, it's important to sell them on all the things we're talking about and on why that ongoing interest is going to drive more people to their development. And I think you see this through, I use Easton Town Center as an example. They have done, some placemaking. I would call them more placemaking than public art, although they have done some murals as well. And places like that see the value in implementing public art because it's drawing people to their places. The other side of that is, especially for new build development, it sometimes, people will always say it sort of lacks that soul of a more historic area. So that public art is the soul when you're doing that. So I think, again, helping convince those developers. And we see what we've seen in Port St. Lucie anyway, and I think this is true of a lot of places that have requirements, is that developers tend to go above and beyond those requirements because they think, okay, well, I'm going to implement this public art. Well, wow, this is going to actually be a cool thing, and this is going to draw people to our development. So we should do more of this. That's a good idea. What do you have to add to that, Amanda?
Nothing really. I mean, I think too, showing the success of public art within private development is really important, because they're not going to want to maintain interaction and meaningful relationships with the community unless they see the success of their investment. And so, I mean, I hate to say it, but like, celebrate them for putting it in their developments. Create an award program within your downtown organization that's like recognizing what they're doing and celebrating that, and celebrating the artist, and writing in your local paper. All those things are really important, and they love that, just like any of us love to be applauded and patted on the head, and they do too. And I think that $10,000-$15,000 for a mural on their property probably isn't a big deal for them in the grand scheme of things. And so showing the thankfulness of the community and that the community has, I hope, would have them be like, I'm going to do this again in my next development, or in this one in a few years.
Absolutely. More questions, anyone? Questions, comments, concerns? Oh, I think we have another one. Oh, no, Wilma, do not apologize. This is really helpful, because otherwise, Amanda and I, if you can't tell, could just sit here and talk for, hours.
Katie says we can't, though. We have one more minute.
Oh, we have one more minute.
I'm kidding.
So with the temporary pieces, where does the art go when that installation is done? And I always assumed it would be returned to the artist. That's a great. So I'll use an example again out of Port St. Lucie, just because we're helping implement their public art program. So I can answer some of those questions really simply. When it comes to like a temporary sculpture, for instance, assuming that it's more of a sculpture on loan than something that's meant to be like disassembled, the sculptures on loan do typically go back to the artists. They may be something that the artist has for sale. They may be something that the artist is, continuing to curate at different exhibitions. So yeah, when it is temporary when we're talking about a sculpture, that typically would go back to the artist. Obviously, if it's something like a mural or what you're looking at in front of you, that is, a semi-permanent mural that's on the street, those things they sort of go away, they fade away, they get repainted, they get painted over, something like that.
Josh, also let me just butt in here and just say to
Please.
Wilma that if you are doing temporary art, it's going to be really important to make sure in your contract that the artist signs an agreement saying they understand that this is the expected duration of the project. It could go longer depending on these factors, but at the end of the project, that's the end of the project. So like, for instance, all the artists who participated in this project that the photo is up, they all understood that the project ended at a certain time and their piece will be removed. So having that protects you, protects your municipality from any kind of unforeseen challenges. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, the second half of her question, I think, is a really great one. So what advice do we have for stirring the conversation that artists should be paid fairly for their work in these public art commissions, and that she is always advocating for that? We've been doing a series of workshops around downtown revitalization in Southeast Ohio. And something that I've said when I get to my little piece about public art is everyone sitting in this room, or most people sitting in this room, likely have a job. Do people ask you to do your job for free? No, they don't. We all expect to be compensated as fairly as possible. I understand the way that the world works, but we don't ask. It's rarely it's artists, maybe sometimes designers, but it's really artists who we always ask to do work for free, and that's just unfair. And we want artists to be able to, live through their art. We want them to be successful business people. We can't do that if we're always asking them to do things for free. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but it's always important to reiterate that to whomever we're talking to, that artists deserve to be compensated just like anyone else. And that, in order to support our arts economy, we have to support the artists. And so if you wouldn't ask a lawyer to do work for free, if you wouldn't ask any other professional to do work for free, don't ask an artist to do work for free.
And also just build it into your budget. Like, make that something that you do regularly so that it becomes normal. And so the people who are saying we shouldn't pay them for these proposals then become used to, okay, well, I got to build in the money for the proposals. And then they become their own, echo chamber. So it works out. I think that if you just keep pushing and you build it into your budget, that's how it's going to be changed in the long run.
Yeah. From Vanita, a question about notable examples of arts administrations in a particular city. Well, we've worked for, let's see, at least 30, 35 cities, if not more now, where we're either helping set up their program, their public art programs, or we're looking at them after 10, 15 years of existence. And the truth is that almost all of these cities that we are working for do have in-house arts administration. Where it's living, you asked about economic development or tourism. Those are maybe two of the ones that we haven't seen them living in. We certainly see, often we're talking about a little bit larger cities here, but they may be living in the Parks and Rec department. They may be living right directly under city leadership, so the city manager's office. They may be living more in the community development, planning and zoning department.
Parks.
Parks, yeah, parks is kind of the big one. But I think when we're talking about smaller communities, you may be referring to more like that they might be living maybe directly outside that community because it's so small that it doesn't really have a big staff. And so it may make more sense for it to live within like a convention and visitors bureau or economic development. I think that the key here is that we try to have some sort of arts professional and whatever world they're living in, that they are, looking at the public art program itself. But I think that it's pretty flexible because it just depends on what your goal of it is. I could see it living in tourism more easily, but the only difficulty there is then that means that your public art is likely going to be focused more on tourism than on your community. And if you couldn't tell, we work in a lot of places that do have tourism dependent economies, and it's always a balance in those places. Glenwood Springs is particularly the type of place that they have a lot of tourism. They have a population of people that live there, and we want to ensure that the public art is benefiting both the tourists and the improving the quality of life for the people that live there.
I would say too, Josh, the most notable city in Ohio with the most notable program is Toledo, and they have an exceptional model to look at and understand and interact with. So I would encourage you to explore that.
Yeah, their model is kind of a hybrid, and I think it is a good one, especially for communities that might not have all that capability within their city to look for different opportunities outside of their city.
Absolutely.
And by the way, if for any of you who have these more in-depth questions, we're happy to talk, offline afterwards and talk, maybe not today, but in the near future, to talk more specifically about, your issues and how we or other people can help you. And there's just one more question, if we can get to that real quick, is what are a couple of the best ways to become a champion in my community? Amanda?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I think picking a small project that you think would have high impact. So a mural, or maybe actually I just saw online this morning when I was on Facebook that Duluth, Georgia, a small city that we worked for years and years ago, has just launched a little ant sculpture project where they're putting out all these little ants all over town, and different businesses are going to sponsor each ant. And then at the end, there's going to be a giant, I don't know how many they're going to be, a giant installation at their city green to celebrate the end of the summer. But all these businesses will have a chance to sponsor an ant. And I mean, I think they're as big as a child. So you would theoretically move them around, and they're all these different colors, and they're made with wood. It looks really cool and fun. But I think, maybe picking a small project that you think would be really great for your community, talking to friends, talking to any community partner organizations that you think would be interested, and then exploring what the budget might be to make that happen. And then figuring out, does somebody have $1,000? Does somebody have $500? And then figuring out a way to honor those contributions, and then getting those out into the community, finding an artist who's willing to work on the project within the budget. I think that's probably.
And to plug our hosts, I mean, I think the Ohio Arts Council exists to help support communities around the state with both funding and, resources and technical support. So I think that, at a minimum, you can reach out to OAC, and, they're there to help. And they can probably provide you with a lot of these resources, and maybe, help you fund and get things off the ground, and really kind of, again, that's what they exist for, right? So that might be all our questions.
Yeah, we stayed to our time frame.
You guys did great, and that was such a wonderful transition. Thanks for the plug there, Josh. That was fantastic. Thank you both so much for taking the time to present and share your expertise today. There's a lot of really great inspiration, a lot of great practical takeaways, and a lot of great questions from the audience. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. As a reminder, we will have a recording of this webinar available probably early next week. We'll send out an email with a link to the recording. It'll also be available on our webinars page at oac.ohio.gov/webinars and on our YouTube channel. And Amanda dropped her and Josh's contact information there in the chat. I'll be sure to include that in the follow-up email as well. So that does it today. Thanks so much to everyone for attending. And again, thank you to Amanda and Josh. And we will see you all next time. Thanks.
Thanks so much.